This is lecture 16 of the course Apologetics. We are looking today at two arguments. One is the teleological argument and the other one is the cosmological argument. Many people have been thinking about it, many people have thought about it, have spoke about it, have discussed those things. We are going to look at it so you will have an idea of what we are talking about. Let's have a word of prayer before we start. Father in heaven, we come before your throne of grace and we praise your name. We lift up our hearts up to you so that you can fill our hearts and our minds in the ways we are doing things according to your will, according to your way. Glorify your name in and through us. When we speak about things that are important, that are difficult, but that are well known in the world. So speak to and through us. This we pray in the name of your Son, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. The first argument we are looking at is the teleological argument. The word teleological comes from the word telos. Telos means the end, the aim, the goal. It's also known as the physico-theological argument, argument for design, or intelligent design argument. It's an argument of for the existence of God, or more generally, the complex functionality in the natural world, which looks designed, is evidence of intelligent creator. So when you see the world, you see design. When you see design, you know there's a intelligent creator, because otherwise there cannot be design. The earliest version or versions we know of are going back to Socrates in the ancient Greek. But seemingly people like Plato and Aristotle also used this argument, and they try to explain the cosmos, and they said the cosmos has to have a intelligent cause. But it was among the Stoics, under their influence, developed a battery of what is now known as creationist arguments, and they are broadly labeled as the arguments or the argument for design. In different religions, that is in Christianity and in Judaism, we see people coming up during the ages and speaking about design. Thomas Aquinas, he had this what is called this five-way, and if you want to know more about it, you just have to look it up, proving the existence of God. And one of them is the idea of the teleological argument or design. In modern day, you have a whole range of people. William Turner, John Ray are well-known proponents. In the 18th century, William Durham published his Physico-Theology, which gave his demonstration of the being and the attributes of God for his work and creation. Later, William Paley, we will come back to him, in 1802, the natural theology of evidences and the existence, or of the existence and the attributes of the deity, published a prominent presentation of a design argument for this version of what is called the watchmaker analogy. So we will talk about the watchmaker in a moment. From the beginning, you had critics. So you had proponents and you had critics. Every version, every argument has its pro and its cons. So this is important for us to understand. When the first evolutionists, well, that's probably the wrong word. When the world accepted the idea of evolution as such in the 19th century, and in the 18th century already, people wrote about what was going to happen. But in the 19th century, with Charles Darwin, we know that he was, of course, against that type. But again, Paley's argument have been very influential, because the argument is a very strong one, and we will look at it. So you have, on one hand, the evolutionists, on the other hand, you have the intelligent design movement. They are in collision course all the time because of what they are and who they are. So after the beginning, in classical Greece, the two approaches to the teleological argument developed, distinguished from their understanding of whether the nature or the natural order was literally created or not. So the non-creationist approach starts mostly with Aristotle, although many thinkers, such as the Neoplatonists, believed it was already intended by Plato. So we know that that some people had some thoughts about the evolution, and that's a long time ago. But remember, at that time, people thought, the thinking was that the natural world was eternal. That is a mistake. And of course, afterwards you can tell about it, but that is the basic contradiction in itself. So their outcome is also a wrong one. But let's not discuss that, because that's not what we are looking for today. We are looking for the teleological argument. While the concept of an intelligence behind the natural order is ancient, the rational argument that concludes that we can know that the natural world has a designer, or a creating intelligence which has human-like purposes, appears to have begun with classical philosophy. So when we speak about creationists and we speak about design, and we are not talking about something that popped up 2 weeks ago. We are talking about thousands of years. So that is what we have, and we found traces back in Judaism, in Christianity, in Confucianism, in classical philosophy, specifically in Western philosophy, and of course in Christian fundamentalists. Contemporary defenders of this type of argument are Richard Swinburne and John Lennox. John Lennox. Excuse me. So what we are looking at is the argument itself, the teleological. So it's a different word. It looks a little bit like theology, but it has nothing to do, because teleological means, like I said, an aim, a goal. You can almost say scientific explanation when you speak about intelligent design. It's a specific scientific explanation versus law of science. Let me give you an example. So to set the course, a radiator of a car holds water. That is a water-cooled engine. That's what they call it. But when it freezes, the water inside expands. When the temperature is dropping under zero, then the water expands and causes the radiator to crack. If the radiator has been slashed, hammered, then the scientific explanation of freezing water is invalid. Let me explain that a little bit. On one hand, you have a frozen radiator, and it cracks because of the freezing temperature. Of course, you can also have a radiator being smashed by a hammer, and when you see the result of it, it's both the same result. In the sense that the radiator isn't functioning anymore. So the reasoning is personal and not scientific. A man can cause the damage. It's like another thing. Okay, like for example, when you have a car and of course you have tires underneath your car. If you drive through a nail, then one of the tires will pop, and you will have a flat tire. Whether you drive to one nail or 25 nails, the tire is flat. So there is a link with, and it's not conclusive, because it can be one or it can be many. Still the damage is there, and the damage is, or it is intended, that's the purpose to damage. For example, you have this nail lines military or police is using to stop someone from driving through, because for example they are looking for him, they know his car is driving a car and he's coming, then they put those nails on the road, and when he comes up, it flips and those tires are gone. So that is intended. Okay, so there's a difference between intended damage and damage that happens because of weather conditions. Natural theology. The content of natural theology has expanded exponentially. New technology provides us with masses of new information. Hugh Grauch, an astrophysicist with the Hubble telescope, and remember we have the James Webb telescope now, which is even bigger and greater. And then you have another one, another satellite. The Kobe satellite is measuring variations in temperature. So little variations in temperature can explain where someone is, for example. We can talk about the microbiology and the book of Michael Behe. He called it, the title, the book title is Darwin's Black Box. Black boxes are phenomena we use. For example, you have a black box in an airplane, and now they are going to do the same thing with trains, to have black boxes in trains. So if something happens, all the specific information is stored into a black box, and some even think of doing that in cars. Okay, well, it's just the idea to have information gathered in one safe environment. So um, there are things that are natural and there are things that look natural. Or there are natural things that aren't look natural. For example, the formation of what is called the sheep mountain. When you look at the mountain, it looks like sheep are climbing the mountain. It's just a natural thing. There's no sheep around. It's just the way it is formed during the flood and afterwards. But when you compare that with, for example, Mount Rushmore in the US, where you have the faces of 4 American presidents, of course, that is not naturally made. That is made by hand. That is made by cutting the faces out of the rock. So when you compare the two, on one hand you know that is natural, on the other hand you know it's not natural. It's man-made. So the thing about those differences is that some of the things are man-made, some of the things are natural. Let us look at what we have here. Just a second. Although we are on the slide of the cosmological argument, we are still talking about the teleological argument. Okay, there are a lot of things we have to look at, and it is important to know that in nature there are absolute fundamental constants. So if you change just a little bit of the circle of the Earth, then we will bump in other planets, or we will bump in the sun. We will come too close to the sun and we will all burn, or we'll be freezing because we will moving out of the orbit, and then we will just a little bit. I'm talking about. I'm not talking about 1% or something. We are talking about 0.0001%, something like that. If that happens, eventually Earth will go away from the sun, or Earth will come close to the sun. It depends on where the change came into. The nuclear power has a power of 0.007, and it has 50 different constants. So it is constant on 50 different levels. If you change one, everything breaks down. And that's the problem we see here, is that it is so fine-tuned that we cannot say this happened by chance. It is impossible, even with billions of years, because the idea is the billions of years does not solve any problem. Okay, because you can always get back to the same problem again and again. If one thing changes, then the Earth changes. Not eventually. And when you speak about billions of years, like 4.7 billion years ago, the Earth came into being. If something was wrong at that time, we would not be living today. So I do not believe in that case. I believe in a creator, designer, someone who's working on those ideas, from those ideas, and it was pushing them through. And you know, he doesn't have a calculator to find out. He doesn't have to compute things. No, he knows. And he can let the earth even disappear in a snatch of a finger. When one thing is wrong, the other thing goes wrong, and that's what that's again the causality of the whole thing. Okay, let's look at the Paley's arguments, and he gives us 5 arguments. Paley's arguments, or the argument, is actually it consists out of 5 parts. So 1, human artifacts are products of intelligent design. When you find pottery, when you find written text, or you find proof like jewelry, you know it's made by man. No animal makes jewelry. No animal writes a book. No animal would put pottery together, bake it, and then use it and break it. And no, that's not what. The breaking can be done by animals, yeah, but not the baking, the using, and the. Okay, so that is typical human. The universe resembles human artifacts. When you look at the whole of the universe, you will say, okay, this looks like what we have seen with the artifacts. You need to have the right person to make it, to use it. Otherwise, you know it's not there. It is impossible to be there. Therefore, the universe is a product of intelligent design. That's a very simple and direct answer. The universe is a product of intelligent design. And I'm not talking about 5,000-6,000 of years, and I'm not talking about 13.7 billion years. I'm just stating the fact that intelligent design is behind what we now know as creation. But the universe is complex and gigantic in comparison to human artifacts. Of course, when you have a small artifact and you say this is human made and this is human used, the same goes with the universe. But the universe is so wide, so big, so great, so enormous. When I speak to people about this specific argument, I sometimes use the numbers evolutionists are using. Evolutionists say that the Big Bang happened 13.7 billion years ago. And then I add something from the Bible when the Bible says that God holds the world, the universe, in his hand. Okay, those 13.7 billion years are actually counted, and what they are saying is that the universe is that big in light years. You have to understand that 1 second is 300,000 kilometers. So you need just over 1 second to go from the Earth to the Moon. The distance of the universe is 13.7 billion light years. That's the distance. We are not talking about time now, we are talking about distance. So 13.7 billion light years. You know, I don't know how to write that down. I have no idea. But anyway, God holds the universe in his hand. So the hand of God must be bigger than the universe. Can you imagine how big his arm is, how big his body is? So I'm just comparing things, and I'm just using things. The universe is complex and gigantic, but still it's being designed. Therefore, there probably is a powerful and vastly intelligent designer who created the universe. Let me say that again. Therefore, there probably is a powerful and vastly intelligent designer who created the universe. Let me repeat that by saying that is the conclusion of Paley. I'm just reading it. Okay, I'm not saying this is my idea, because I believe there is a God who created, and that's my point of view. So he is only supporting my idea. Of course, there are, and again I say that there are strengths and there are weaknesses on every argument. The argument is simple to understand, and it has merit since humans are designers by nature. We design. When you write down, you're actually designing. When you draw a picture, you're actually designing. When you think of things that are not yet in place and you think you're going to put them in place, that is designing. And that is exactly what God did when creating the world. Romans 1 verse 20, for those who would like to have a biblical verse. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Nobody can say, I didn't know. You just have to look around, see the trees, see the mountains, see the sea, see the roads, see the things in nature. They are all there. See the birds in the sky, see the sky itself. It's all there. The magnificence of God is visible in his creation. I think this argument carries a lot of weight, and it is, like I showed you, consistent with Scripture. The Bible states that we are made in the image of God. Just think about that. Therefore, there are certain things with which we will resonate. Even though the unbeliever suppresses the truth of God in his unrighteousness. Again, the text of Romans 1, verses 18 to 32. But the truth is still there. So there's no... The argument is people cannot use the argument against God. The argument is in support of God. Additionally, evolutionists have difficulty accounting for apparent design in objects like your eye, your heart, your brain, the different parts that come together to form a whole. Because when you take an eye separately, it cannot live, because it needs to have the link with the brain to say what it sees. If there is no brain, then it doesn't see. And the same thing goes with the brain. If the eye isn't there and the feeling aren't there, nothing comes out of the brain. So there is an interaction. So it's not only a miracle. Let me use that word. It's a miracle that an eye came into existence. It's a miracle that brain came into existence. It's a miracle that heart came into existence, because all other muscles are just functioning like muscles, and the heart is, it is a muscle, but it's not functioning like muscles. How come? So it's not only the individual design of the parts, it is also the the bringing together of a whole, which is called, or what we now call, humans. And when you go back into the Bible, you will find where it happened. So we have this powerful, beautiful image and imagery about who we are, what we are. Of course, again, there are strengths and weaknesses, and we have to look for the weaknesses too, so we can find answers to it. The idea that the universe is designed is subjective. Okay, we were not there when the design was made, and we are now afterwards looking back. In the natural world, different observations in the natural world can produce different theories to account for their existence. Also, this proof is built upon an analogy. So it's one thing, you compare it with something else, and then you build a case on this. That in itself is a type of a weakness. If we find things in the universe that are chaotic, then the analogy would simply the analogy would be that there is no designer. That is, if we find, and people say, look at the stars and the comets and the planets. They are just there. No, actually none is just there. Every one of them are in place according to their own orbit. So that is a strong argument, but it's, like I said, the analogy, sometimes it's a little bit difficult. Let's now look at the three approaches of the cosmological argument. Let me first explain the cosmological argument, because otherwise it's kind of strange to speak about. A cosmological argument in natural theology is an argument that claims that the existence of God can be inferred from facts concerning causation. Causation, that is the action of causing something. Think about that, okay? Causation, explanation, change, motion, contingency, dependency, finitude with respect to the universe or some totality of objects. The cosmological argument can also sometimes be referred to as the argument of universal causality, an argument from the first cause, the causal argument, or prime mover. That's another way of looking at the argument. Sometimes it's called the prime mover argument. Whichever term is employed or used, there are two basic variants for the argument, each with subtle yet important distinction. The basic premises of these arguments involve the concept of causality. The conclusion of these arguments is that there is a first cause, subsequently analyzed to be God. History of this argument goes back to Aristotle, or even earlier. It was developed by Neoplatonism and early Christianity. Later in medieval theology in the 9th and the 12th century, it was introduced to medieval Christian theology in the 13th century by Thomas Aquinas. The cosmological argument is closely related to the principle of sufficient reason, and there are certain people who go that way. Itself a modern exposition of the claim that nothing comes from nothing, attributes to Parmenides. Today's people who are following the arguments or using the arguments are William Lane Craig and Robert Koons, Alexander approach. I'm just giving this as an introduction to the idea of the cosmological argument, because there are, like I said, there are different approaches, and the different approaches are going to work in and through us, going to work in and through in and through our minds. So we will have to keep in mind that there are different types. Okay, let's go for it. The stronger the argument, Ron Nash is speaking, and he's saying the stronger the argument, the less people will understand it. So I'm here with the enormous difficult task to explain to you something that is being not understood by a whole range of people. One version of the cosmological argument of the existence of God emphasizes that God as first in time. Another would say God first in importance. And of course that is a huge difference when you approach God, when you approach the argument itself, when you look at it to say, okay, God is the first cause, first in time, or first in importance. What is it? I'm just saying these are things that are happening in the physical world, and people look at it. Let's look at it. The cosmologos. Cosmos is the world or the universe. Logos is the teaching of it. So the world exists. Well, yeah, when you look around, you know the world exists. What is the first cause? What causes it to exist? First cause in time, first cause in importance. Three major failings. Three possible difficulties we are looking at. The first cause may be dead now. Maybe there is not one cause, but there are many causes. Or maybe the cause itself is finite. So there are three different difficulties when you look at the causality. So that is what Ron Nash was saying about it. And yes, it has some good arguments. It has weaknesses. I would say, if I would bring those two together, those two different approaches, the time-wise and the importance-wise, I would say they are actually the same. It is not important in time, and it's not about the importance in time or important in first in importance. No, it is time and importance at the same time. So God is the most important and the first in time, and then you bring them together, and then you have at least a broader view, a broader solution. Let's now look at number 2, which is Matt Slick. Of course, it will be a little bit longer than Ron Nash, because Ron Nash is more or less a theological philosopher, and is trying to explain things in a very short way. And you have to know much more about him thinking about the way he thought, and then when he brings things forward, it's a condensed form. Matt Slick is a apologist, so he comes from a different point of view to speak about these specifics. So the cosmological argument, according to Matt Slick, The cosmological argument attempts to prove that God exists by showing that there cannot be an infinite number of regressions of causes to things that exist. What he's saying, when you look back, you cannot go back indefinitely. It must end somewhere, so you must find the cause of what we are talking about. And when you find the beginning, at the beginning, you will find something else, which is the uncaused cause. Someone who is not linked to creation, not linked to the natural world, but causes the natural world to come into existence. That uncaused cause, we call him God. So the cosmological argument takes several forms, but is basically represented like we have it here below. Things, remember we talked about the world exists, so he starts with things exist. It is possible that those things do not exist. Okay, let me say it this way. Something is there, something is not there. It depends on how you look at it. Whatever has the possibility of non-existence, everything that has the possibility of not being, but it exists. It is there, has been caused to exist. Everything that you see and has the possibility of not existing has the cause. That is the reason, need someone else, something else to come into being. Something cannot bring itself into being. That is an impossibility. The existence is always linked to a prior cause. Let me say, if you say that if you don't follow this reasoning, then you're actually working illogical. It means that when you say something exists without having a cause, someone who caused it, something who caused it, then you have a problem. That's illogical. When you go back to the evolutionary thinking of a Big Bang, where nothing existed, and that nothing came into existence without interference of anything else, well, that's purely illogical. There's nothing logical about it. Everything must have a cause. Therefore, all the uncaused causes of all things. There is someone without a beginning was there at the beginning. The beginning is our beginning. It's not his or hers or its beginning. No? We say it's God, and we have good proof for it, but the issue is here that cause, of course, you need a cause for something to be. There's nothing that is not being created, not came into being. Everything came into being, what you can see. But, for example, you can take a tree. You cut it down and you burn it. Then the tree is no longer there. The branches are gone, the leaves are gone, the stem is gone, everything is gone. There's nothing there anymore. So in the other direction, you have a possibility. But that tree must have come from another tree, and a similar, at least the same tree from the same root of the tree. And then you go back in time, okay? That tree comes from another tree, that tree comes from another tree, that tree comes from another tree. All of them are cut down, but they are still, let me say it this way, they are still alive in their ancestors, in the children's tree, in the tree that is there now. So you have a parent tree and you have a child tree, and the child tree, the parent tree goes down, but the child tree exists. Child tree becomes an adult himself, and he produces another range of children trees, and so it will be going on. But all of them are disappearing because of, let me say, just giving the example, we were all burned down, all those trees. Eventually, still there will be trees. Okay, so that is what the argument is. When you go back into time, you will always find something, someone that is there and caused it. The uncaused cause, the one without the beginning, must be God. Thomas Aquinas had a version of cosmological argument called the argument of motion. He stated that things in motion could not have brought themselves into motion, but must have been caused to move. There cannot be an infinite regression of movers, therefore there must be what he called an unmoved mover, similar to the uncaused cause. The unmoved mover, according to Thomas Aquinas, is God. Again, you have strength of the argument, again its simplicity, its easily comprehensible concept that there can be there cannot be an infinite number of causes to an event. It's limited. Some arguments of God's existence require more than training in terms of concepts, but this argument is basic and simple. Also, it is perfectly logic to assert that objects cannot bring themselves into existence and must therefore have a cause. The weakness of the argument, one of the weaknesses of this argument, is that all things need a cause to exist. Then God himself must also, by definition, need a cause to exist. But yeah, it doesn't stop there, because if you say God needs a cause to exist, then that cause must be bigger than God. And again, that cause, the pre-God must be bigger than God himself, and the pre-God must be bigger than pre-God. You know, so that's just thinking. That's impossible. That's illogical, by the way. You need one cause, and you need something, someone outside of the cause to cause it, to move it, to use it. So God, by definition, is uncaused. Let's look at cosmological argument by Brad Houston. Excuse me. So Brad Houston, a little bit different, but of course, again, close to well, it's still the same argument. The argument to be made is a form of cosmological argument which originated in the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle and was refined by Thomas Aquinas. With the advances of modern science, the version I will provide will be perhaps clearer for some than the form set forth by Aquinas. It should have actually be Thomas, because Aquinas was the place where he was living. So he was called Thomas Aquinas because he was Thomas, lived in Aquinas. But anyway, so that's just semantics. It's a composite of Aquinas' vertical cosmological argument and the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that has a beginning needs a cause. The universe had a beginning. The universe needs a cause. There cannot be an infinite regress of caused causes. There must be a cause for all else, which has no beginning and needs no cause for its own existence. So this is already a step further in thinking. Premise 1, the idea here is self-evident. A thing cannot bring about its own existence, since it cannot be before itself. That's simple. Everything that exists has a beginning. It cannot be popped up from nothing and from nowhere. Nothing produces nothing. There are several pieces of evidence that support the contention of premise 2 that the universe had a beginning. Number 2, remember? We speak about number 2 here. The universe had a beginning. Scientific community has long accepted the beginning of the universe via the Big Bang. To quote Norman Geisler, logically and mathematically, the evidence for the Big Bang suggests that originally there was no space, no time, and no matter. Let me say that again. Logically and mathematically, the evidence for the Big Bang suggests that originally there was no space, no time, no matter. Nothing. Here are some much summarized points to demonstrate why the universe is thought to have begun, most of which set forth by the astronomer Robert Jastrow, and some which had been subsequently discovered. And I have to read because those things are very difficult to explain. Let's look at it. The second law of thermodynamics shows that the usable energy is running down, which means there had to be a time when the process started, because otherwise energy would be everything that existed. If not, if there was an infinite time before us, all energy in the universe would have been used up right now, and there would be none left. Number 2, the universe is expanding. Traced backwards, there would be a place where it started to expand. The universe cannot be continually expanding and retracting, since it would eventually run out of energy and then it would collapse. Number 3, if the universe were eternal, time would also be eternal. But we could never have gotten to this point if time was infinite. Time measures the intervals between movements. There was no movement until the universe began. Therefore, there was no time. So you cannot speak about time before the start of everything. It would be impossible to traverse an infinite amount of time. You cannot just go through eternal time or something like that. Number 4, we see matter continually degrading rather than becoming more complex. If things fall apart when they are left to themselves, the world could not be infinite. It would already be destroyed. If there was time and the degradation was ongoing from the first moment, then there would be nothing today. Because time-wise, that's impossible. Number 5, there is a radiation echo to the universe, which scientists first thought it was merely static or a malfunction of their equipment. This emanation of radiation is consistent with what would be expected as an enormous explosion in time, down to the wavelength that should be produced by such light and heat. So if you have an explosion of the magnitude of the Big Bang, you need to hear it and you need to see it today. And in a certain sense, you can say you can hear it and you can see it today. After the Big Bang theory became the prominent view of the universe origin, scientists began looking for a large mass of matter associated with the original explosion, but none could be found until the Hubble telescope made it possible to find it. One astronomer, Michael Lemonick, said, "By peering back into the beginning of time, a satellite finds the oldest structure ever observed, evidence of how the universe took shape 15 billion years ago." That's Lemonick, and he's already speaking in 1993. This was exactly what they were looking for, if the theory were to be shown to be true beyond a reasonable doubt. Remember, we talked about the James Webb telescope now, and that is going further. So the findings in 93 were, well, not as strong as they thought it were. Premise number 3. Premise number 3 is true. Remember, we looked at premise number 3, which was the universe needs a cause. It's true by the laws of logic if the first two are true. So if number 1, everything that has a beginning needs a cause, the universe had a beginning, and then number 3, the universe needs a cause. That's a logical deduction. So it's true. Everything we currently observe depends on something else. This includes subatomic particles, our planet's atmosphere, the sun, and everything observable. If it weren't for our atmosphere, you and your computer could and would vaporize. So if everything in the universe is currently dependent, the whole universe is currently dependent. Excuse me a second. Let's stop here and start with the next lecture with the next premise.